Hello, welcome to Journal Doc by Kerala Museum. The Kerala Museum is a vibrant beacon of arts in Kochi, set up in 1987. It is the brainchild of R. Madhavan Nair, who even then recognized the need for a cultural institution to provide experiential learning in history, the fine arts, and performing arts in the city. To mark its 35th year in existence, the museum launched its flagship program on Kerala history, Journal Digital Archives. The program aims to create innovative, engaging, and experiential digital exhibition by drawing on historical archives and micro-histories of people and communities from Kerala. The Journal Talk series is part of the programming around Journal Digital Archives. The Geojit Foundation supports Journal Archives and builds on the museum's founder Madhavan Nair's dream of making history accessible to all. Today, in the 26th talk, we present the topic Between Yemen and Kochi, Tracing Jewish Connection on Malabar Coast by Dr. Ophira Gamliel. Dr. Ophira Gamliel is a senior lecturer at the University of Glasgow, specializing in South Asian religions. She teaches on Indian religions, Arab Jews, Indian Ocean religious history, and environmental crisis. Her most recent book is Judaism in South India, Relocating Malabar Jews, and she is currently the co-PI of the research project Hindu-Muslim Jewish Origin Legends in Circulation Between the Malabar Coast and the Mediterranean. Before the lecture, I want to remind you of the house rules. The lecture will be for 45 minutes and followed by a question answer. And we will take a maximum of 5 questions. So you can drop your questions in the chat. Everyone has their own belief and perspectives. So let's make an effort to respect others while sharing our own views. Attendees may please keep your mic mute for the duration of the talk. Then only the speaker is audible. I warmly welcome Dr. Ophira Gamliel. Please, ma'am.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great honor to be hosted by the Museum of Kerala History. Should I share the screen now? Yes. Okay, so I'll just put a stopwatch. Please bear with me, so I will not take too much time. And again, it's really a great honor to be here, and this project by the museum, Janal, is very impressive. So I hope I can contribute something to that. Okay, so this lecture is going to start with very old period, with the Kollam copper plates, and try to substantiate. We know there were connections between the Malabar Coast and Yemen, and we know that Jews were traveling in between, but the more concrete evidence for individuals is a little bit later. So I will first start with the older period and then slowly progress via the inscriptions to talk more specifically about specific Yemeni Jews. Okay, so Kollam 849, this is actually the oldest evidence we have for contacts between Jews and the Malabar Coast. And this is in the very famous Kollam copper plates that has, I'm kind of skipping most of the story here, but it has at the end one plate with names from both sides of Arabs. Their name is in Kufic Arabic, probably mainly Muslims. Then we have Pahlavi, and note that the Arabic is very nicely engraved, whereas the Pahlavi is a little bit not very good. That's what at least epigraphists of Pahlavi say. And finally, we have the Hebrew names, and they are written in Judeo-Persian. We know it's Judeo-Persian and not Hebrew and not Arabic because each name is surrounded with the phrase Hamgun Man Farish Guhum, I am a witness to this. So the first name is Hassan Ali, and with Hassan Ali, we can start thinking about the connections with Yemen, because this merchant probably, and again, it's a bit speculative, but probably he was the founder of a dynasty of merchants that 200 years later become very prominent in Aden, in the port town of Aden in Yemen. We know that because Jews are in the habit, I think also Muslims, but Jews are in the habit of, at least in the Arabic-speaking world, of giving the names of their father to their firstborn son. So later on, we find in documents from Aden, related to Aden, that merchant family with consequential names of Hassan and Ali, and sometimes also translated into Hebrew, later becomes very prominent in Aden. The second name is Ishaq Ismail. Itzhak is a Hebrew name, and Ismail is the name that was the older brother of Isaac in the Old Testament, and it is associated with the father of all the Muslim nations. So it's very interesting that the Jew bears this name, and I got to say that it's not only in this inscription that we have a Jew bearing the name Ishmael. It's there every once in a while. There are even rabbis with that name. Still, I thought it's interesting to note. Then we have the name Abraham Kuami, and he was 100% Persian Jew because his name is a Nisbe, Kuami, which means he belonged to the city of Qum in Persia. And finally, we have Zikri Yahya, which I find very interesting because I suspect that this man, even though his name is written in Judeo-Persian, he might have been an Arabic-speaking Jew. You can see his name here in the inscription. It's a little bit difficult to figure out that this is Zikri, and a lot of epigraphists who read it made a mistake thinking it's something else. But I figure out this is the name also because, again, it's a name of merchants that appear in later records from Yemen. And it's very common name among Yemeni Jews. And the thing is that the scribe that put those names, that probably was the first time the scribe saw the Hebrew script. So it's a little bit messed up. It's a little bit difficult to read. And what is interesting about this, the spelling of this name is, you know, the way it is spelled is as if it was Arabic and not Hebrew, because we usually write Aleph at the end of that name. But what we have here is a Yod, which is the way it would be spelled in the Arabic with two Yod letters. Okay, and just before I proceed, these images are taken from Raghava Warrior and Keshavan Velutat's book of 2013 in Malayalam, Tarisa Pari Pattayam. Highly recommended to all of you. It's available in Kerala. And when you read that book, you learn that we are talking here about a trade agreement more than anything else. There is very little religious significance as opposed to what usually is said about these Kollam copper plates. We have evidence that for South Indians, Arabs, and Persians joining in a network, we have evidence that we're talking about Hindu, possibly also Jain or Buddhist or both people, Muslims, Christians, Zoroastrians, and Jews. So it's a multi-ethnic and multi-religious trade agreement. And it is the agreement that you can say is also the earliest evidence for the emerging port town of Kollam, which in Arabic and Hebrew is later called Kollam and Kollam Mali, and a very famous port town for centuries to come. We have kings associated with it, Stanu Ravi Varman, Perumal, right, the great king of Kerala, the king of Venad, and his vassal king Raman Tiruvadigal. And the interesting thing about the terms and names that appear and titles that appear in this inscription is that they continuously resurface in the centuries to come. So for example, Ibn Battuta, when he reaches Kollam in the mid-14th century, talks about Sultan, right, the king Tiruvari. Tiruvari is not a name, but it is the Malayalam title, Tiruvadi. And in this inscription specifically, it's a very democratic way of, taking decisions like giving land to the foreign merchants. They gather together, these Tiruvadigal and other local chieftains and rulers. Among them, those who give actual land to the traders, and they are called in the inscription Punai Talapadi and Pulai Kudipadi. And we usually read it as place names, Punai Tala and Pulai Kudi. And these are the local chieftains, Padi, right? The local landlords. And just, to go back to the later documents that deal with Indo-Arab trade in the region, we see terms like Fatan Somi, which is derived from Patana Swami, not mentioned in this specific inscription, but it's a name known from other texts. And Fadiar is very much recurring in some of the Yemeni documents related to the trade in Judeo-Arabic. And I think it comes from this Padi plus Ar as a respectful term. And once you start thinking about it, that these are people who were engaging with the networks, with the maritime networks between the Malabar Coast and Arabia, maybe also Persia, you start thinking about, wait a minute, so what is this Punai and what is this Pulai? And I would like to suggest that we should perhaps think about it as Talapadi and Kudipadi, the heads of the major head of a group or a tribe or a family or cluster of family, extended families. And they are named after trade products that were very important for shipbuilding. So Puna is this tree, which is called in English Alexandrian laurel, and it is growing on salty lands all across the Indian Ocean, and it is used in the shipbuilding industry that later becomes very prominent in Aden, where you don't have trees. And the other one, Pulai, is this Malabar cotton tree, which is used in the textile industry, and thus it's, of course, another product that was very important for Indian Ocean trade. And finally, usually when you hear about the Kollam copper plates, you start with this prominent figure, Maruvan Sapir Isho. He was a Persian Christian, and he was probably the connection between the Arab traders, Arab and Persian traders, and the South Indian traders and local rulers. And he represents in the inscription two trade guilds, Anjuvanam and Manigramam, that received the land to construct the Tarisa Pali. Pali, everybody knows today means a church. I'm a little bit, I hope I don't make too much problem in saying that I suspect actually it means settlement here and not exactly a church. But this is a different issue. Perhaps in the later discussion we can think about it. What is more important for our purposes is to see how these terms are reflected from the other side of the Arabian Sea in the terms tujar, the merchants, like a group of merchants, and banyan and banainun, which reflects the Indian term manig or vanij. Gramam, of course, is a group of vanij, a group of merchants, which in many Indian languages later become pronounced banyan and becomes even a caste name. Okay. So all this very, maybe a little bit too long introduction is to say that this inscription is evidence for the establishment of Indo-Arab maritime trade networks, and the Jews of Malabar and the Jews of Aden and of Yemen, whenever it had to do with trade, were embedded within those Indo-Arab maritime networks starting in the mid-9th century. We have more evidence for this. We first, yes, we see Kollam emerging first, right, as a trade portal, in the documents at least. We then see Aden coming into the documents. There's a wonderful book by Roxania Alani Margariti about 150 years in the life of the port town of Aden. But Aden I think, I would like to speculate, has a lot to do with the emergence of Kollam and has a lot to do with the emergence of this network in the mid-9th century. And then later on, we have also Calicut coming into being. So we have those networks, multi-ethnic and multi-religious, that developed the various port towns along the shores of the Arabian Sea. And indeed, we have between the 12th and the 13th centuries, we have a huge cache of record found in the Cairo Geniza, in a synagogue in Cairo. It's called the Cairo Geniza records, evidence for the Indo-Arab maritime trade networks that specifically of the Jews within them. And these are business records written in Judeo-Arabic. And especially famous is the story of Avraham ben Iju, originally a Jew from Tunisia. He had a family in Tunisia and he migrated to Aden, and from Aden to the Malabar Coast, and became a very rich and important merchant in this network. And the records related to him come between 1132 and 1147. So no, so far there is no Yemeni Jews specifically in this story. I would like to say something about Yemen before we proceed. You have to know that Yemen had one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world. There is they found a synagogue there from the 2nd century in a place called Kana. And they had even a Jewish kingdom with a king called Himyar between the 4th and the 6th centuries. So this is one of the most important Jewish communities in the Arabic-speaking world. Now it's almost extinct. This Abraham ben Iju married or cohabitated, I think would be more accurate to say. His woman was a Nair lady called Ashu. And he manumitted her in another kind of story that we can have another lecture about, but he gave her a Hebrew name, Beracha Bat Israel. The deed of manumission states that she was a slave girl, but her brother was a Nair, so we have some strange issues here. In any case, this Ashu, or Beracha Bat Israel, obviously was not a Jew, right? And here it's important to mention that those trade networks built, it's very known for Muslims, right? That Mapilas, right? They had this system of marrying local women, foreign merchants coming marrying local women, and out of that emerged the community eventually. And I think the similar thing happened with Jews. And what you see also is some evidence for that in the documents. This is a Judeo-Arabic record. If you know the Hebrew script, you can read it with a little bit of effort. You can read it, but you will not understand anything if you don't know Arabic. And if you know Arabic, but you don't know the Hebrew script, you will not understand anything if you don't know the Hebrew script, and a little bit of Hebrew as well. So this is Judeo-Arabic. This is what they call Judeo-Arabic. And in one of those documents, a letter that was sent to Abraham ben Iju, you find this interesting name, Ishaq el-Banyan. Ishaq, the way it is spelled here, suggests that this is a Muslim and not a Jew, Ishaq. But what is more important is to see how we have a man bearing a Semitic, is probably Muslim name, but he is defined as a Banyan merchant, that is a South Indian or an Indian from the West Coast. So this system of intermarriages, probably that's what made the Jewish communities in the centuries to come. And we have a little bit of evidence for that from Chenda Mangalam from 1269, a very famous, for anybody who studies the history of Jews in Kerala, tombstone. And this tombstone is important for our purposes. When we start reading it, we can see, well, it says, "Blessed be the judge of truth, the rock." That's a way that the Jewish God is referred to, Hatzur. the rock of perfect deeds. This is the grave of Sarah, daughter of Israel. And if you remember, the conversion name that was given to the wife of Abraham Beniju is daughter of Israel. It was very common when women would be converted into Judaism. It was very common to do it even until the 20th century. You know, sometimes that today Jewish historians tend to kind of brush aside, but it was common. There was no issue with that. There were no issues with that. But converts would get those names, daughter of Abraham or daughter or son of Israel. So again, it's a bit speculative. We can't be 100% sure, but this woman was most probably also a convert, just like Ashu, the wife of Amam Beniju. And then you have all these formulaic expressions like may God's spirit guide her. And then you have the date. And the date is important because the way the dating system works sometimes can also tell us something about the affiliation of a certain inscription. In this case, it is difficult to tell, to be honest. Could be circumstantially related also to Yemen, because we know that Aden was the first port of call for the merchants before going to Malabar. But I have to say that all across the Jewish world in West Asia, they used to several types of calendric dates. One of the common ways of dating was era of contracts. So here you see the era of contracts. It's the year 1581. There is a 312 years difference from the Gregorian calendar. So that's how we calculate 1269. Okay, so there's also the Hebrew month and which day, etc. And now let us have a look at some an inscription from Yemen, not very far into the future, from Aden in 1333. This tombstone is there in the British Museum. And it was brought to London as a weight in a ship coming from Aden in the late 19th century. They used it, you know, at the bottom of the ship to give it weight and stabilize the ship. So they used those heavy stones. That's how it reached London. And this inscription has this text, more or less. It's very difficult to read. Actually, it's more difficult to read this one than Sarah Bat Israel's tombstone. Rest in eternal peace. So you have all these formulaic expressions. And then there is the year, if we read it properly. But this is also what the British Museum, how they cataloged it. Several people read this inscription before I tried my eyes and sense. And this is a woman that was gathered, and her name gathered to her ancestors, and her name is Saada, daughter of Abraham. So again, you see this expression, daughter of Abraham. Of course, Abraham could be the name of her Jewish father, but we could also have a case of a convert lady. We should suspect that that might be the case. So this is the Yemeni inscription, and we can perhaps compare this one to Sarah Bat Israel's inscription and think a little bit about the material aspects of these both inscriptions. And what is really interesting to see is that the one from Chenamangalam is a little bit more stylized and perfected. At least the stone is being straightened and flattened, whereas the Yemeni inscription is kind of rough and full of, you know, it's like as if somebody just wanted to do it in order to do the burial. Okay, and of course we can also compare the way the letters are inscribed, etc., etc. There is a lot of epigraphic work to do when you think about those things. Now I'm jumping a little bit and reaching Kochi. There are two important dates in Kochi, 1344 and 1550, in terms of the inscriptional evidence that we have. And both are related to this synagogue that is almost completely gone by now, Kadavum Bagam Synagogue. This is how it looked like I think in the 1940s. I think this is when this image is coming from. And it had this inscription dated 1344, this Hebrew inscription that was hidden it's not was hidden, it was kept at the attic of this synagogue as recorded by an epigraphist called David Sassoon in 1932. He said that this inscription was there. And the reason it was there is because in the mid-16th century, this synagogue was renovated and expanded and enlarged. This whole structure here at the front and also the roof probably was raised high in order to contain more Jewish practitioners and congregants. And the reason is probably because of trade. During the Portuguese time, trade in Kochi became, enhanced. So probably this is one of the reasons. Now, here's the interesting thing about when you compare these two inscriptions. You can see that the style of writing is very similar. So you can say that by the mid-14th century, you had proficient Jewish scribes that can write inscriptions in Kerala. Maybe they were not Jews, but the scribes, those who actually put the letters on the stone, right? They knew how the letters look like and how they should look like, unlike the 9th century with the Kollam copper plates. And here's the interesting thing. As I told you, until the 16th century, the system of dating years among Asian Jews, there were several systems. One of the most prominent systems was era of contracts, and that includes Yemen. But in the 16th century, this changed. A rabbi from Alexandria said, no, we should now all resort to another system of calendar years, which is Anno Mundi, from creation. Until then, European Jews used this Anno Mundi, whereas Asian Jews used mainly era of contracts. Only Yemeni Jews continued to use the system of era of contracts until the 20th century. Only Yemeni Jews. And what you see in these two inscriptions is that in this one, you have Anno Mundi in the oldest inscriptions. So you can say that possibly this inscription, the people who actually established Cairo synagogue were European Jews, not Arabic-speaking Jews. And that's a very interesting thing. Again, it's a little bit speculative, but it should be, a kind of a direction of research that should be taken up and thought about. And the other inscription, the later inscription of 1550, not only that it is dated according to the era of contracts, and at this period we can say, yes, there is probably direct affiliation to Yemen, but the merchants mentioned on that inscription, one is Jacob, son of David Castile. His family came a few decades earlier from Spain, Castilla. And the other one is Baruch Levi, that from later records we know was of a German family. So we have here two European Jews, or Jews with former connections at least to Europe, and both of them affiliate themselves to Yemen via the dating in this inscription. So Yemen in the mid-15th century for the Jews of Cochin was a very important place of reference. That at some point changes. Now, what you see in this image here is the way that this 600-year-old synagogue looks like in Cochin. It's very sad, and it's even in a war situation right now. And another thing I would like you to pay attention to is the location of this synagogue, which is kind of directly connected to the landing hut, the Kadavu, right? That's why it's called Kadavum. It was probably, if this is indeed the earliest site, and I believe it is, it was established as the first market of Kochi, right? 1344 is just 2 or 3 years after the Great Flood of 1341 that carved out the natural harbor of Kochi. And before that, as far as I'm aware of, there was no institution, a market institution or royal institution or religious institution in the island of Kochi. So this site probably is the earliest site of Kochi as a port town. And this is how this important monument looks like now. It's very sad, actually, the neglect and the kind of, what happened to it and what might be hidden underneath this synagogue is also an interesting question for archaeologists. And there's another synagogue that was erased from the landscape of Kochi. This is a synagogue that was constructed in 1489 by the earliest Castiel, Spanish Jew that we know ever arrived. Note that the date is 9 years before the arrival of the Portuguese, right? So, and this man, again, Castiel, he's Jacob Castile. His name is recorded in this important inscription that was lost and found, and it is now, I'm not sure who owns it, but maybe some people here would know. And again, the year is dated, the year is mentioned as a verse, if only thou hast rebuilt, which is Atat. It's, I think it is, if I remember correctly, yes, 1881, which equals 1489. And again, era of contracts. So we have this Spanish Jew coming all the way to Kochi before the Portuguese, most probably via Yemen, and affiliates himself with the West Asian Jewish calendar, probably, again, most probably Yemen. And at the same site of that synagogue that completely got erased, it was just, it's not there anymore. It was just 2 or 3 houses south of the Pardeshi synagogue. Another tombstone is found. And I owe gratitude to Taufik Zakaria for sending those images to me and to my Jewish friends in Israel, because otherwise we wouldn't have known about it. And this one already has the dating according to the European system of calendars, Anno Mundi. And the interesting thing about the person who is buried there is his name, Isaac Sulam. Sulam, the Sulam family were a family of book merchants from Italy. I think, if I remember correctly, from Venice. So we have here this kind of cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic, multi-regional connections around those synagogues in Kochi, these 2 synagogues, very important synagogues. One is no more, one is almost completely gone. Okay, this is the map of the landscape. That's where this synagogue I was talking about now, the Tekumbagam synagogue, what once stood. You can see the Matan Shadi Palace, you can see the Pardeshi synagogue, and just below it, you see this, the site where Tekumbagam synagogue once stood. Kadvumbagam is a little bit to the south, and Chembri Tapali, another very important religious institution, and probably also related to, not probably, for sure related also to Indian Ocean trade, is Chembri Tapali. And most probably they had connections with the Jews of Kadvumbagam. If I am not mistaken, Chembri Tapali is 2 or 3 decades later to Kadvumbagam, and there are some folk traditions among the community of Chembri Tapali that connects it to the Jews of Kadvumbagam, saying that they donated the teak wood for the construction of Chembri Tapali. Okay, and in the early 17th century, now we are going there, we start seeing more evidence for Yemeni Jews. The first one is Elia Adani. He is recorded as the poet of this inscription of 1616. He probably was, quite sure he was alive at the time. And this is the inscription of the synagogue in Parur, not in Kochi. But Elia Adani was in Kochi. He was a member of the Kadavum synagogue community. And this inscription is a poem. It says, "O Lord, abiding in the bush." The bush is a reference to a story from Exodus. "For him my house shall abide. Let there be light for the house of Jacob." And the house of Jacob is the nation of Israel, so for the Jews. "For it was darkened in exile." The house of Jacob, the Jews are in exile and in the darkness. It's a very formulaic expression. "Thus said David, son of Jacob, of the prestigious Castile," right? So we see a dynasty of Castilian Jews starting from 1489, from the late 15th century. Probably they also were connected to the region before that, and continuously being mentioned first in Tecumseh Synagogue in Kochi, then in Kadavum Synagogue in 1550, and here we have them in 1616 in Parur. They probably donated the wealth to each of those synagogues. They were probably very wealthy merchants. This family eventually disappears from the records, more or less. We actually have descendants of this family in Israel right now, but they don't realize that their origins in those Castiles. A little bit of sad story. Okay, and this sacred sanctuary was completed. The word completed is also the Hebrew word hushlam is also the word that is used for the dating, and the date again is according to Anu Mundi. So we see a shift in this kind of dating affiliation, now aligning more with the rest of the Jewish world and less so with Yemen. And this Elia Adani, he was a poet, as I said, probably a scholar too. And at the late 17th century, his collection, his manuscripts written by hand, is given as the Cochin custom, okay, by a Paradeshi Jew. His name is Levi Belilia. He was an Iraqi Jew. And he gives it to a Jew from Amsterdam of Portuguese origins, Moshe Pereira de Paiva, a very famous person that reached Kochi and met the Jews of Kochi. Moshe Pereira de Paiva was a diamond merchant, and actually he was a guest of the Dutch governor. So at that point in time, the network shifts, the Jewish traders' networks that are clustering around Kochi start shifting to the direction of the European trade companies. And this book signals the connections with Amsterdam. They sent the manuscript to Amsterdam to be printed at the house of a Jew of German origins called Uri ben Aaron Levi. There's a nice date at the title page, and the date is 1688. And it took 2 years for the books to reach Kochi. There is a Malayalam song with the date that celebrates the arrival of the books to Kochi. And the end of the last page of this book has this lovely image of a boat, of a ship. And it's not a coincidence. You can see that this ship, the sails are directed towards the east, right? And you see a monsoon cloud on the right side. So this is for me a kind of statement. It's not just about the Hebrew poetry and how lovely to have a Hebrew poet from Kochi, etc. We are, with this manuscript and this print, we create a new type of network of texts and of prints to strengthen our connections with the Jews of the Indian Oceans, that is Malabar Jews. And you have the very compelling work of Mahmoud Kuria, who writes about those print networks and textual networks in the context of Muslims of the Indian Ocean. So this is a similar thing. And a little, personal note about Eliyahu Ha'adani. Of course, his name means that he came from Aden, right? So this is, you can say, the first Malabari Jew who you can say, that's a very clear Yemeni Jewish connection. He dedicates the manuscript to his son who died before reaching maturity. It's very touching and very sad also. Another probably Yemeni Jew, at least according to the tradition, and if it's true that this poet, another poet called Nehemiah, son of Abraham, or Nami Muta, he's believed to have originated in Yemen. He's believed to have been a Yemeni Jew whose father reached the Malabar Coast. But that's about it. It's just the oral tradition that we can rely on for that reason. There is also a song probably composed around the time that he died in 1616, composed in the honor of his father for the Nercha that was celebrated near his tomb every year. He belonged to the Kardavum community as well. And most probably in the 17th century, this is the community that attracted the most poets, learned scholars, and merchants from Yemen and from other places, as you saw, Castile and Germany. So this is his tombstone in Kochi. And this is the only tombstone that is left from a much larger cemetery that belonged to that community of Kardavum and maybe also to Tekumbagam, and definitely also to the Pardeshi Jews, as you can see in the map. So this tombstone is, this is the way the grave around it looked in the 1980s. It's a photograph by Marcia Wallerstein. And where it is in Kochi, it is here. This is, right, there is a neighborhood around it now, nowadays. People are living all around it, but it once stood at a larger old cemetery, and still you have this reference even in the map, old cemetery. And above it, you can see the new cemetery, or the Pardeshi cemetery, surrounded by a wall with well-preserved tombstones. And some of the tombstones in this newer cemetery are not on a grave, they are just leaning on a wall, on that separation wall, because they must have been brought there from the site of the older cemetery. And you have an inscription on the wall of this new cemetery, this separation wall, I call it, that was designed in order to separate between the old cemetery of the so-called Black Jews and the newer cemetery of the Pardeshi so-called White Jews. And this separation wall was built only in 1898, so very late into the almost 20th century. So this idea of separated community, it took its time to be formed and formulated and actually impacted in the landscape. We see social housing being built around in the site of the old cemetery in the 1970s, and that signals the beginning of the scattering of the tombstone of the old cemetery of Kardavum. Okay, I'll take 5-6 minutes, if that's okay, to finish with some of the tombstones that are found there, that are scattered in the landscape. People find them, people use them, sometimes in their own buildings, and sometimes they are brought to different locations. And I'll just talk about some Yemeni names in those tombstones. So, for example, this one that Meidad Eliyahu, one of my colleagues, Jewish colleagues in Israel, took the image, belongs to Rabbi Yehya. Remember that name, Yehya, that we saw in the Kollam cover plates? It is a very common Yemeni Jewish name. And he is the son of Rabbi Suleiman. Suleiman is, of course, the Arabic name, version of Shlomo. And his family name is Jamal. And that is something that is very touching for me because my own family comes from Yemen, from northern Yemen, and my grandfather's name was Jamal. And I think all we have left is oral history of our family, but from the stories told about him and the family, it looks like he also had some kind of trade connections in the past, the trade of textiles. Jamal means camel rider, so that's another reason to think that the family had a history of traders. And it was surprising for me to find this name Jamal. Now, they were not from Aden, okay? That's important to say. And again, the date is Anno Mundi, whereas in Yemen, at the time, they kept using the era of contract. And this Jamal, by the way, you can also see in some of the records left from the history of the connections between Yemeni and the Malabar Jews is mentioned in some letters sent to the Habi family by a rabbi from Sana'a, also in northern Yemen. And he's mentioned along a name which also is related to the village where my father's family came from, Saada. That's where the Houthis are today. And that's another one that is probably a Yemeni, not probably, I'm sure it's a Yemeni person. It belonged to Rabbi Abraham, again, son of Yahya. This time, this Yahya is a different Yahya, Hamami. Hamami is probably from Hammam, from the bathing place. So probably his family has some kind of profession in their past that is related to bathing places. And they are all these tombstones, they are from the beginning of the 19th century. And this is another one from this place called Folklore Museum in Arnavulam. They have a few Hebrew tombstones there. Lord knows how they get there. And what is going to happen to them also is unclear, but they are there. And these tombstones belong to a venerable teacher, the senior is Muta, remember Namia Muta? Son of Mari Yehuda Kandil. Mari is a teacher like Mudyare in Malayalam, so it's the one who is responsible for teaching kids. And we know, again, from later documents that he belonged to the Paradeshi community, which is also interesting. Most of them, I think, most of the Yemeni Jews in Kochi, I think were affiliated to the Karvan Bagam, but I don't know, more research is required. And finally, another one is that from that same folklore museum is this tombstone of a woman, Esther, daughter of the venerable Abraham Siani. So even though daughter of Abraham, it doesn't mean automatically she was a convert, because Siani is obviously a Jewish name from Yemen, from a place called Sian. And again, I have a personal connection here because my father had a good friend, Shimon Siani. That's how I immediately said, oh my God, this is like relatives of ours. And Shimon Siani, and now I'm kind of wrapping up. I hope it's okay. I'm taking a little bit more time to talk about art. As you can see, there are lots of connections here of histories that are kind of erased, of communities that are no more. Their sites, the landscapes are erased. And the only way to preserve the memories and to maybe do something about, to make them present in the world is via art. So Itamar Siani, a descendant of this Esther, daughter of Abraham, he probably doesn't even know, that he had this connection with India. He migrated from Yemen as a child in the 1940s, late 1940s, and the kind of feeling of displacement and being uprooted from such an old history of his community and family is expressed in his art. So this abstract painting is story of my life, he calls it, and he has lots of, themes that are related to representing the lost community of Yemeni Jews. And I'll just, his younger brother, we have some of his paintings in my family, not very good photos, but he was less known. And I would like to finish with the work of Meidad Eliyahu, an artist whose origins in Nagulam. He's now in Israel. And And we had this little project here in Kochi with Reshmi Satish and Shri Aravind and Arun Bhaskar. Reshmi Satish, I don't have to tell you, she's a very talented, beautiful singer. And Shri Devi Aravind is a professor of Malayalam cinema in the Malayalam University, and Arun Bhaskar, her husband, is doing video art and videos. And that was our project. So I just have to, just a minute, I have a strange message. I need to remember to put, yes, share computer sound. And I hope you can all hear it. If there is a problem with the sound or anything, just let me know, okay? Just check again. No? Yes, okay. Here it is, should be fine. So I'll end with that, and it's a Jewish Malayalam song that my dad made the visual.
കപ്പലിലെ കോളും കാറ്റും കപ്പലിലെ കേറി വന്ന് മണവാട്ടിയുടെ കപ്പലിൽ മണവാളൻ കേറി മണവാളന്റെ കപ്പലിൽ മണവാട്ടി കേറി തോതൻ കപ്പലിൽ തോതത്തിമാരും തോതത്തി കപ്പലിൽ തോതന്മാരും ഏലേലോ ഏലോ ഏലോ തത്തിന്തക ഏലേലോ ഏലോ ഏലോ വില്ലുവർ സലവാവി വില്ലുസും പട്ടും പച്ച നിറം വെള്ള നിറം ചേലയുറമാലി റോഡിയ കപ്പലിൽ ഓടിയ മാരു മന്നവർ സന്തോഷം ശമ്പനം പാട്ടും തിന്തക ഏലേലോ ഏലോ ഏലോ മുഷ്കിലത്താദത്തിലെ കൊച്ചി തന്നിലെ കൊച്ചിയാ തിരിയ പങ്കുയൻ യാടി വരവേ ഈന വിളങ്ങുമേ.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ophira. And now it's the time for Q&A. Everybody can drop their questions on our chat, and Tina will facilitate the Q&A.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. That was a very enlightening talk, Dr. Ophira.
Thank you.
We were very happy to hear you utter the words like our old king, Chairman Perumal, then Tiruvadigal, Pattanam Swami, Chenamangalam, etc. And see, I was wondering, I know that nobody can be converted into Judaism, but you mentioned about the Nair girl who was given a Jewish name after her marriage with a Jew, a prominent Jew, and also you mentioned about the black Jews. And I was wondering, you talked about that separation wall in the Paradesi synagogue in Kochi or somewhere, and how this black-skinned people came to Judaism. Was there a conversion possible in the ancient times? Would you please answer that?
Yeah, it's There are a lot of assumptions that it's a struggle to try and kind of, get rid of them. For example, that Black or brown people come into Judaism. Jews come from the Middle East, right? I mean, as I said, we had a Yemeni community in Yemen since the 2nd century. So actually the natural skin color of Jews is darker. And the term Black is used as a derogative term. It's not really a term relating to any skin color, actually. And this whole idea of black and white, once you start looking into the documents and the history, and that's what I was trying to do, you can see that, wait a minute, when we talk about Paradeshi Jews, right, and the white Jews, first of all, Paradeshi is just foreign in Malayalam, right? It's not white. So this whole idea of whiteness, the question should be, when do we start seeing this whole idea of whiteness? When do we start talking about black and white Jews? And I have no good answer to this question, except for I saw the earliest evidence for this term in relation to Jews is in Portuguese documents. And in the same Portuguese documents, they also refer to white and black Nayars, white and black Christians, and white and black Muslims. What does it mean? And then you reach, the Dutch period, and it's only about white and black Jews. Why? Why do they differentiate? These are open questions. I have to start writing about it, thinking about it. Hopefully in 2 or 3 years, I will publish something more. But I can tell you that in Hebrew records, in Jewish records, even in the mid-16th century, when we have a record about conflicts within the community, there is no mention of whiteness or blackness. So where does it come from and why? And it has nothing to do with the ethnic origins, neither of the Pardeshi community nor of the so-called black Jews. As I showed you, the Castilian Jew, right, from Castilia was related to 3 so-called black Jewish communities, but he was from Spain. So this whole idea that the Paradeshis are originated in Spain is simply incorrect. They have families from Iraq, from Germany, from Morocco, from Palestine, from different places. Only Castilian are from Spain, and they are connected with 3 other so-called black Jewish families. I don't want to continue talking about it, but this is a very racist idea, very racist category, and I really hope that people would be more using those terms more critically and thinking about it more critically and not just taking it on face value. Yes, any other questions?
Ophira, there is one more question here from Johan Kurula. So he's thanking you for the talk, and he had a question on the symmetry. He says symmetries. There is a speculation among some that there existed another symmetry somewhere behind the Tekkumbagam synagogue. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it is true. And what we heard, I did a little bit of research with my dad Eliyahu and another community member called Yoshua Eliyahu. Our article was published in Hebrew, and it is in process of being published also in English, hopefully soon, open access, we hope. But yes, we collected some also oral traditions about a cemetery in the backyard of Tekkumbagam synagogue, which is very exceptional when we think about the way usually Jews bury outside of the synagogue and settlement compound, not in the compound of synagogue. So it's another thing to think about. And I just, to go back to the previous question, you also asked about conversion, and I didn't say anything about that. It's important, to say that the idea that Jews converted or didn't convert in ancient times, it's like a little bit of a taboo. Actually, conversions were very common, and most of us originated in different types of conversions over the centuries. So it's it's normal, it's normal that a Jew who intermarriages or cohabitate with a woman who is not Jewish either converts her or maybe even just converts her ad hoc. It still happens today. It happened also among the Yemenis in the 1940s. I heard from my own family how they used to go to Ethiopia to get women and convert them and add them to the family. There was nothing exceptional in that, just like in any other community. It was more complicated, it was more difficult, but still conversions were very common all across the Jewish world.
So does that mean, about Judaism, it is often said that it is a ethno-religion. Jews are not just religious people, they are a race. So if there is intermingling with other races, that the definition changes, right? I mean, that
Yes, so this is, it's first of all, there are no races. There is just human race. Let's start with that. That the skin color is different is not a different race. We are all one Homo sapiens. That's it. That's the scientific way. Secondly, there is this idea that there is a Jewish gene, a Kohen gene. Look, I don't know about genetics. I'm very suspicious about genetics in terms of religion and culture or groups of people or language. So I'd like to put it aside. If what makes a Jew is the scriptures they use, the community they belong to, their dietary habits, the history perhaps, but not anything that is like genetic, and the idea that all Jews originated in some biblical people, that were exiled in 70 AD, and ever since then they remained close, it just doesn't make sense. I'm sorry to say, not historically and not in any way. So that's my 2 pence into this discussion.
Okay, there's two other questions which I think we can be clubbed. One is from Sankida and another from Srinath. So they're asking, one, were there other places in India where there were Jewish settlements? And whether there are narratives by Jews from India who've traveled to other parts of the world.
What is the second question again?
That are there narratives by Jews in India who have traveled to other parts of the world?
Narrators.
Narratives.
Narratives.
Yeah, narratives.
By Indian Jews that travel to other parts of the world. That's an interesting question. I really don't know. There are lots of narratives about the Jews of Malabar, and many of them are fabricated. But I'll go to the first question first about Jewish settlements. So most probably, here is Bino Icherian says in Surat, in I don't know about Vapi, Pune. First of all,
it's there. I have been there because I have been a resident of Mumbai and I have visited all these places. And currently I'm located in Kochi, actively sometimes going to Kadavambagam Synagogue.
Okay, that's a Kadavambagam Synagogue in Ernakulam, I guess.
Yes. Joseph Eliasai.
Yes. So yes, there were Jewish communities all across, not all across, but let's say, yes, all across the Western Indian Ocean world. There were Jewish communities in Armenia. They found a cemetery there, but there are no more for many centuries. There were Jewish communities in the Arabian Peninsula that disappeared by the 20th century. So what is a Jewish community precisely is something that we have to better define. Is it a community? Do you mean a community that exists for a few decades because there is some trade interest in town, like the case of Surat? So there were Jews coming and going from Surat for many centuries, and at some point there was they had a synagogue. Apparently there is a print, I just recently saw it on Twitter, by a librarian from Columbia University Library, and the first page, it's printed in Venice, okay, in the late 16th century, but down below there is a small a small text in Arabic which says Masali, which is a praying place, and Sirat, which is the a kind of a strange way to spell Surat. And there is other evidence also. Again, I have to read more about it in order to say something very decisive, but apparently there was a small community in Surat for some time. And similarly, I'm pretty convinced that there was a community in Madai. There is evidence to suggest that in different types of evidential records, oral history, but also other written records and linguistic analysis of the literature of Kerala Jews. So Madai, there was a community in Palur. There is what is the only thing left is a brass lamp where it is written Palur with the date is 17th century. 16th century. And the communities in Mumbai and Pune are only from 18th century onwards. There was also a community in Madras from 18th century onwards. But maybe there were other places. There was just recently, there were many headlines in Indian media about a Hebrew tombstone found in Tamil Nadu. I can't remember the place name, Ramanagapattinam or something like that. I just saw an image of this inscription. I don't know anything else about it. It has to be studied. My dear colleague Selva Kumar, he's an archaeologist. I think he's studying those pieces of evidence. He says that there are also inscriptions in Arabic and another text in Tamil, or maybe another Hebrew inscription. Anyways, I haven't seen enough evidence. I haven't seen any studies about that. So I don't know if there was a community there or not. What I know is that the evidence we have so far from medieval times, from the records, like the Geniza records, the Cairo Geniza records, there is no evidence that there was any significant Jewish contact, at least with the east coast of India. So I'm a little bit doubtful, but let us wait and see what research and studies say about that. I hope I answered that question. So that was about the settlements. And the other question, can you remind me? There was another
That
part.
was about, you already answered that. It was about the people who traveled, Jews who traveled to other
Indian
parts of
Jewish narratives. So what we do have, we don't have narratives traveling outside, but we have the Jewish Malayalam literature that has different stories and echoes of travel narratives. And there is, of course, the very famous 12th century Benjamin of Tudela's travelogue, but I don't think he was in Kerala. He was just talking about what he saw in Kerala, what others saw in Kerala, what he heard about Kerala, about Kollam, of course, the port town of Kollam. I don't think he reached further east than Yemen, than Aden. Anyways, yes.
Yeah, there is one question from Swati Lega, where she is asking you to elaborate on the food practices of Cochin Jews, and if there was a way, is there any way in which they used kosher practices to establish their identity? And this is also, well, there's one more question which is connected. She says, are there any, after death, are there any remembrance meals given, like for other communities in Kerala, they have that. So did Jews also have that?
Remembrance meals. I can't recall. In weddings, the wedding customs used to be open and shared with other communities in Kerala, and also the Simchat Torah holiday had a section in it in which all the neighbors of the synagogue community, the non-Jewish neighbors, would be invited for a feast with drinks and with food and etc. I observed this custom in Israel, in a Jewish Kerala Jewish community there. In their synagogue, they call it the Onan Karnore feast, in which the eldest person in the community has to feed everybody around. So I think probably I observed it in Kerala, the late Sami Halegua, whose wife just recently passed away, Queenie Halegua. I was once in their this Onan Karnore feast. He was the Onan Karnore of the Pardeshi community. And it was obvious that all the non-Jewish neighbors are invited for this feast in Kochi. And I suppose that the same was the custom in the other communities. As for the kosher, the dietary habits, yes, of course, that's what, that's the main, one of the main practices that differentiates between Jews and others. And similarly for Muslims, similarly for the Hindus, I guess, Jains, etc., etc. So dietary habits is a very important issue for any religious or caste community. I mean, we can ask questions about where caste and religion intersect, right? But dietary habits for Jews are even a little bit like caste in many respects, and purity and pollution of the food is very important. So no mixing of milk and meat and poultry products, certain types of fish. It's actually quite tedious, to be honest. There are lots of rules about what to eat and what not to eat. And if you are a very strictly observant Jew, you have to think about it all the time. I suspect that in the medieval times, in early modern times, and maybe even as late as the 20th century, even though there are lots of rules and lots of laws about it, I think most Jews, at least in Asia, would be relaxed about it, not make too much of a fuss, but they wouldn't eat pork. That is something that is very basic and very important. It's considered really polluting. So yeah, that's in a nutshell. And of course, also Kerala Jews observed all those customs. They had a special, they call it shochet. I think, halal. Jews are much more like Muslims, by the way, in many respects. So they had this halal thing with how to butcher animals. It's part of the purity pollution thing. And I remember when I first came to Kerala and I met Jewish families in Kerala, they asked me to bring from Israel meat because they had only a butcher. This is Babu from Kollam Marnagulam. He was the only one left in Kerala at the time who knew how to slaughter chicken according to the rules and regulations of the Jewish halal of kosher slaughter. So yeah, probably they had experts before that, also for beef.
Is pork banned in Israel?
Excuse me?
Is pork banned in Israel?
No, it's not banned in Israel. There are communities who eat pork.
Okay, I think this will have to be our last question. So this is from Varghese Ummen. He says, great talk. Is there evidence of Jewish community existence in biblical times when St. Thomas came here, as his visit was supposed to have happened? So I guess you know the year, it is supposed to be 52 AD. So, and your thoughts on this?
My thoughts, again, I don't want to annoy anybody, but I'm very, I like to stick to the facts. The legends are important, and it's also an important question to think. When do we start to see these origin legends? And this is part of my project now with Munster on Hindu, Muslim, and Jewish origin legends from the Malabar Coast. I'm not qualified enough to talk about the Christian origin legends. You need to know a little bit of Syriac for that. And I don't know Syriac, and also my colleague doesn't know Syriac. So we have Arabic, Hebrew, and Malayalam, and we work with that around the Kerlolpati, etc., etc. And Tuhfat al-Mujahideen mentions those origin legends. So we have a question, we need to ask ourselves, when do people start telling us about biblical Jews arriving as refugees to the Malabar Coast? And it doesn't start before the 16th century. And the place where those legends about lost tribes in the Malabar Coast and biblical Jews that came as refugees, or Solomon the king, etc., they start in Europe, in Florence, in Italy. So you don't have, and I can tell you another thing, as a Yemeni Jew, there are also similar origin legends about Yemeni Jews and about the Jews of Asia. And what I hear here as a scholar is this attempt to, exoticize our communities and make us, as if we were isolated and left from biblical times, ancient times, and then only the European traders and trade companies and colonialists found us, discovered us, civilized us, brought us all back to Israel. These are all messianic and nationalistic and dangerous ideas. We have to be careful with these legends, and we have to think about how did they emerge, what have they done, what are they doing today, It's quite difficult when we look at the news from Israel, Palestine today to see what legends can do or belief systems can do to real living people. And I can tell you for our communities, both for Kerala Jews and for Yemeni Jews and for many other communities across Asia, they erased us from our, they disjoined us from our roots, erased us, brought us all back to one place to live in one big ghetto, and we cannot go back to where our ancestors came from. We cannot even access the cemeteries that they had, All we have is oral history and a little bit of faint traces here and there. And that's what also happened basically to the so-called Black Jews of Kerala or Malabar Jews. I hope I answered that question sufficiently.
Akhtar, would you like to come on?
Yeah. Hello.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe we can close the session now. We have taken more than 5 questions now. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Ophira, for such a wonderful and great presentation and a talk. And thank you all for joining us. And also, I'm thanking my team, Kollam Museum team, too. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope next time it can be in person. And thank you for the wonderful questions and comments. I saved the chat so I can have a look at your comments